Well, the Nintendo Switch 2 conversation just keeps on trucking along. Like I even joked about in my last video, it really feels like every single day there are new conversations and rumors and discussions and leaks going around out there that support the idea of Nintendo's next generation console or Switch 2 or whatever it is popping up sometime soon, which personally I love to see as a game fan, as a Nintendo fan, as somebody who always likes new hardware and new console generations, and of course somebody who's already kind of been predicting this window of time to see this happen anyway for a couple of years. It's a great, wonderful thing to see. Obviously nothing is confirmed, we're only ever talking about ideas and rumors and leaks, but it sure is starting to feel like it's one of those where there's smoke, there's fire kind of situations. So of course there's been a couple of things going around the past week or so that lead to the idea of maybe some kind of pseudo confirmations or leaks about the Switch 2 coming soon. And by the way, for the sake of this conversation and probably all of my conversations, I just think Switch 2 is the most ideal and succinct name to use to get the idea across. I've talked about it in other videos that whenever Nintendo shows us their next thing, whether it's this year, next year, or in 5 years, whenever it happens, it could be anything. It could be a Switch 2, right, or a Super Switch or what have you. It could be another hybrid device. It could be another, just a regular home console, and they ditch the hybrid thing. I don't think any of us suspect that they would do that, but it's possible, you know, in this period now before we know what they're doing. It could be something else totally weird. Maybe it is going to be like a VR headset console thing. So, you know, I think calling it Switch 2 is just the most simple way to get the idea across of Nintendo's next-gen piece of hardware console. So just putting that disclaimer out there. I've already been doing it that way for a couple of months. A lot of other people have, to be fair. So just a reminder, when I say Switch 2, I mean whatever the next thing is going to be. And so there have been a lot of these conversations, right, that we've been having. And most recently, there was a very interesting scenario around someone on 4chan of all places, as we all joke about, right? Somebody who apparently was able to predict or state facts about what was going to show up in last week's Pokemon presentation. And again, even as a non-Pokemon fan, I saw Pokemon fans discussing it and confirming that everything that person said in their post was true and did happen in that Pokemon show. And of course, the last thing they said was discussing new Switch models releasing around the same time as the last DLC package for Pokemon, and they talk about new graphics enhancements that are meant to come alongside of that. And so it seems like it was some kind of inside statement of fact about new Switch models in some way, shape, or form coming soon. Very exciting. That could have just meant new, you know, Pokemon branded Switches or something different, like a different iteration of the Switch, or it could have meant something that's like Switch 2 or Switch Pro or whatever. Another recent thing that just happened is somebody on Reddit apparently has now been officially blocked or deleted at the request of Nintendo themselves. So I don't yet have a whole lot of information on this. I'm not going to dive too deep into it. I'll try to find something that explains it more and link it in the video description. But that's like a current breaking sort of thing that's happening right now, is somebody on Reddit has said things in the past, I guess very accurate, and I guess at the request of Nintendo, which is what makes it very interesting. This person has been blocked or removed or what have you from Reddit, because there's probably concern that if this person has inside, like, factory level knowledge of what Nintendo's doing, such as products being made in a factory, like new hardware, that maybe they would end up spoiling or leaking some of that, maybe with some photos or some confirmations. And obviously that could impact, like, you know, sales of products like maybe Tears of the Kingdom, because maybe it would make people wait on buying the Switch version to see if there's a next-gen version. They just announced this like Mario Switch bundle of the current Switch, and maybe it would impact sales of that. Why would somebody buy this Mario Switch bundle of the old Switch if there might be a new thing around the corner, like we all suspect? But if this person could maybe leak something concrete about it, then of course it could impact current sales. So that's just the line of thinking, and I think the initial takeaway of Nintendo requesting someone to be removed from Reddit right now. It's a very crazy thing, and it's just more smoke to this possible fire about the next-gen Switch 2 coming sometime in the next 6 to 18 months. But the other big and kind of exciting thing happening right now comes back to our favorite friend, at least here on this channel recently, Mr. Jeff Grubb. And I swear it's kind of funny. I really just need to reach out to the guy because I've mentioned this before. Like, we travel in the same circles. We know a lot of the same people. I've never met or talked to the guy. Although, Jeff, I did see you comment on my Metroid Prime remastered reaction video, so I appreciate you kind of seeking that out and finding that. but we've never met or spoken. But like over the past, like what, 2 months, I've had to reference a lot of his conversations and leaks and discussions many, many times, right? Especially around Metroid Prime Remastered and Metroid Primes 2 and 3 and all of his statements there, and the fact that the Metroid Prime remake that he and Emily Rogers, by the way, who was the first person to put the idea out there, that, you know, they were correct about. And then I just discussed the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess ports, which he's also mentioned, and maybe those could now become true because he and Emily were correct about Metroid Prime Remastered. And so we're coming back to more Jeff Grubb things today, right? And so it's just a crazy, like, shout-out situation where I'm constantly referencing things he says. Some people believe what he says, other people don't. I'm not making a claim on that. He just seems like a really smart, nice guy, and he's got stuff to say about a potential new Switch console. And so let's take a look at what he said. It's a very short clip. You've probably seen it. Let's take a look at what he said on the Kinda Funny Games podcast, by the way, which is a very large platform, about what he basically heard about what Nintendo's doing.
It's still on the table that we get something Switch, not Pro, but maybe even not necessarily Switch 2. Maybe something like in between that is definitely like an actual upgrade in terms of hardware, but in terms of the way that Nintendo positions it, it feels like they could try to do like to straddle the line a little bit and do like a super Switch that continues the generation in a way that is more significant than they've done since the Game Boy Color, but even more significant than that. And the thinking there clearly is they have Nintendo Switch Online, they have a lot of subscribers, they have a lot of people who are spending a lot of money buying video games, and they don't want to disrupt or lose any of that momentum because all the other companies have figured out how to maintain it. And they don't want to be the one company like restarting from zero. We all know that they've said as much publicly in earnings reports that they don't want to restart that. The whole idea is to now build on that going forward.
So this is incredibly interesting stuff he says, and I actually have a lot of mixed feelings about it, even though it obviously lends credence to the prediction I've been making for 3 years now, that this would be the year and the window of time that we would see or maybe even play their next machine after the Switch. It also just feels kind of strange the way he describes it, right? Because he can't really, with any confidence, describe what it is he's heard, and I do feel like there seems to be a lack of confidence about the way he goes about describing it, which makes me wonder how accurate what he heard could even be. I mean, I do certainly believe he heard something. I don't think he's making up something he's heard. I think he truly has heard a thing about this that's come to his ears, right? But the way he's going about describing it and talking about it, it is certainly exciting, but it just feels very strange. And so I don't quite yet know how to make out how I really feel about what he's saying and how he's delivering it. But then the even weirder thing is the actual piece of hardware he's trying to describe. And that's something else I'm struggling to wrap my brain around. So obviously the most exciting thing is he's talking about Nintendo in the planning phases right now for an imminent reveal of their next console. And that could be in 2023. It could even be in early 2024. And to me, I think even in the next like 1 year, let's say, to me, that can qualify as an imminent reveal, I would say. And so either way, we're talking about this thing now, and people are claiming to hear things. Jeff Grubb doesn't have a 100% track record, but he's got a damn good track record, so it's worth at least discussing, right? And so the exciting part is that it seems like Nintendo is officially doing something and getting ready to reveal something. But then he describes what he's heard it is, and that's where I get confused on how I feel about it, right? Because he says it's not a Switch Pro, but he says it probably isn't even a Switch 2, right? Like a true next-gen successor. He describes it as something in between, and he just mentions a colloquial term of Super Switch. I don't think that means anything. It's just a way he tries to summarize the concept. I don't think we should focus on the term Super Switch. But really what he's saying is it's in between a Switch Pro and a Switch 2. And it's like, I don't know what that is supposed to mean, because to me, and this is just my own personal feelings, okay? So everyone, you guys might feel differently, but to me, I feel like you can only really be one or the other. You can only be a Switch Pro that plays an identical library to the current Switch, but just beefs up some visuals, resolution, and frame rates and whatever, and so that's great. That has its own value in its own way. Or you can be something next generation that's a pretty significant jump in power to the point that it can play games that can't be played on the prior generation, or the prior Switch in this case. What is in between? I don't even know what that really means. Like, to me, here's what it comes down to. I'm going to most succinctly describe my personal feelings about this. Again, you might feel differently. This is how I define the line, right? And it's very simple. There is a clearly defined line in my brain. Boom, this is the line. You're either on this side or you're on this side. And this line to me is, can you play games the other system can't? Okay, so if Nintendo releases a new console, I don't care what they call it, the Nintendo Switch Pro, the Super Switch, the Switch Plus, the Switch 2, the Switch 360, the new Nintendo Switch 3DS XL, I don't care, the Nintendo Schmoopity-Doo. They can call it anything. But if this thing has a jump in power strong enough to allow games to run on it that are coming to PS5 and Series X, but that the current Switch can't run, and it starts to build, it would probably be backwards compatible, so the whole Switch library transfers over. But if it can play games that this other Switch can no longer do, and it starts to build its own additional exclusive library of other current games, we're talking the next Resident Evil game, we're talking Cyberpunk 2077, we're talking about Grand Theft Auto 6, we're talking about Skyrim, the next Elder Scrolls, Microsoft, whatever, games like those, right? The next Witcher game, if it starts to build a library of those, and this other Switch is not getting those games because it's not powerful enough to run them, and it gets further and further left behind in terms of games it can play, while this one continues to build up new ones, first and third party, that's the definition of the line I draw, and I'm like, this is next gen now. It can run games the old Switch can't, and it's getting those games that are exclusive to it that this old Switch is no longer getting. And even though this will probably be supported with some games, it becomes about this. And so it's a long-winded way for me to say that's how I define the line of what we're talking about. So even if this thing is called Switch Pro, it's got exclusive games because the jump in power is strong enough. And so this is next gen. This becomes last gen, the current Switch we have. And so coming back to the point here, what is the in-between? What is a Super Switch, the way he just, describes it? What does that even mean? To me, it's like you either can play exclusive games or you can't. If you can't, I think it's just going to be a Switch Pro. Even if they don't define it as a Switch Pro, if all it does is give a marginal boost in power to all of the current games available first and third party, that's all it is. But this one has the opportunity to allow third-party developers to make new games for it. And so, I don't know. That's why when I think about what he's saying, I don't know how to feel about this in-between concept. And so most importantly, we just come back to the larger conversation, which is just that this is feeding into the idea that Nintendo is very close to some kind of reveal and confirmation about their next hardware, right? Which I've been talking about for 3 years. It's very cool to see that, maybe my conversation is going to be accurate, and in the year of 2023, we will officially see or hear something concrete about the thing. And that's really exciting, not because I've been talking about it. I mean, that is cool, but more just because I love Nintendo and I love gaming, and it's exciting whenever new hardware is releasing. I was jazzed as hell about the PS5 and Series X coming out. I own both of those consoles, and I don't play my Xbox much because, man, there's nothing to play on that damn thing. But I love my PS5, and I think eventually the Series X is going to have some significant games to play, and I'll be excited when those come out. Like, if Starfield comes out this year, I'm buying the hell out of that game and playing it on my Series X, right? So any new console generation and any new hardware and any jump in power for any company is always exciting. You guys know I'm an old man, dude. I'm 42 years old. I turned 43 this year. So I've gone through so many console generations going back to like the 8, 16, 60, 32 and 64-bit days. I have experienced the excitement and freshness and hype around new console generations and jumps in power so many times in my life, and it never gets old. Listen to this old man who's been on this planet for 4 decades playing games his whole life. It never gets old to get excited about new hardware and new console generations. And since my favorite company just happens to be Nintendo, even though I'm a fan of them all, this is the greatest time. We should celebrate the fact that these conversations are happening, the excitement's getting out there. It's not a negative slight against the current Switch, because there are some diehard Switch fanboys and fangirls out there that are a little bit too emotionally tied to their feelings about the Switch, and I think it's a little unhealthy, so I just want to caution everyone to be responsible with your passions about your hobbies, in this case gaming. A new Switch console, if it happens soon, it's not anything against our precious Nintendo Switch. Like, this is just what tends to happen. And it's also why, last point here at the end of the video, and Jeff even touches on it a little bit. Obviously, Nintendo is treading very carefully with how they transition from the mega successful Nintendo Switch era and Switch generation into whatever their next thing is going to be whenever it happens. Maybe my thinking and other people's thinking is wrong and it's not going to happen soon. Maybe it is still a couple of years away. I think that's impossible, but whenever it happens, Nintendo needs to do it carefully. And so Jeff talks about Nintendo wanting to carry over everyone's Nintendo Online accounts and their eShop purchases and their Switch Online subscriptions. And to me, I feel like that's not really a big problem for Nintendo to solve. I don't see a world where Nintendo's next console, whether it's a Switch 2 hybrid or a home console or whatever, I don't see a world where it's not backwards compatible with Switch games, physical and digital. Even if the architecture is different, we've seen Nintendo show that they can make it happen. So it's going to be backwards compatible. And we've seen all the companies now, Sony and Microsoft and Steam and whatever, they're transferring PSN and Xbox Live and Game Pass accounts from generation to generation. Nintendo can easily do the same thing. I know it. Maybe the kind of architecture means they have to put more effort and money into making it happen, but I know that the technology exists for Nintendo to do it, so they're gonna do it. So everything we've done, our current Nintendo accounts, our Switch Online subscriptions, every game we've purchased and downloaded, in this era, it is a mandatory requirement, if you're going to switch hardware, to allow your consumer base to transfer that stuff over. Nintendo themselves has even said that's their game plan, so I don't care what their next hardware looks like. It's going to be backwards compatible, I'm claiming it now, and all of our online purchases and profiles and subscriptions will carry over too. Easy. It's done. I don't think that's a concern, so Nintendo's going to do that. I think they're going to reveal and release this thing while Switch sales are still strong. I don't buy into the idea of waiting for Switch sales to die and then try to resuscitate a dying brand with new hardware. No. Those days are over. It's time to carry Switch momentum and the strength of a Nintendo brand into the new generation. Don't wait for things to die down. Keep the peak going and maybe make it go higher with the next gen thing. So this is just what I think. It's a very exciting time. And I think that everything Jeff Grubb to me makes sense. Other than the in-between thing, I don't buy into that. To me, it's either going to be a Pro or it's going to be a Switch 2. I think either are possible. But my money, as you guys have heard me say for 3 years, is on a Switch 2 being shown to us pretty soon.